There's something strangely wrong with the history of Need for Speed. And no, it's not just EA releasing the same game since 2015. I'm talking about hidden files, missing prototypes, canceled projects involving bizarre stuff like hackers or even terrorism. There's a whole underworld in the franchise that almost nobody knows about. If you spend too much time on obscure forums, lost YouTube channels, or subreddits that feel like urban legends with Wi-Fi, you've probably heard of some of them. Games that once existed, that actually ran, that were ready to be released, but got deleted, censored, or rewritten. And today we're digging up every one of them? Some kind of automotive necromancy. I don't think that term even exists, but anyway. Need for Speed 64. It was a golden decade. The 90s, peak of the console wars when Nintendo still ruled many childhoods with the power of cartridges and 64 bits of pure nostalgia. Electronic Arts, meanwhile, was beginning to establish the Need for Speed series as a benchmark for stylish street racing and realistic speed. Everything was lining up for an epic crossover, right? Well, not quite. There's a parallel universe where 7-year-old you would pop a Need for Speed 64 cartridge into your console and go racing Ferraris, Lambos, and Vipers through the pixelated streets of San Francisco. But here, in the sad reality we live in, that game was canceled before it ever saw the light of day. And as if that wasn't enough, it ended up morphing into something completely different, Beetle Adventure Racing. Yep, you heard that right. A Need for Speed game turned into a colorful Beetle-themed adventure. The plan was simple. Adapt the success of Need for Speed 2 or 3 Hot Pursuit to the Nintendo 64. Adjusted graphics, performance tuned to the console, an epic soundtrack. EA even hired the same team that worked on Need for Speed 2 to kick things off. They were already testing tracks, modeling cars, and playing around with the engine. But the Nintendo 64 wasn't exactly the best platform for this kind of game. While the PlayStation cruised ahead with CD-based games and high-quality audio, Nintendo was still stuck with cartridges. Storage space? Tiny. Sound effects and music? Heavily compressed? High-definition licensed cars? Forget it. Little by little, the team realized that simply porting Need for Speed wasn't going to work. Performance was poor. Controls didn't feel right, and the series' trademark realism, the feeling of being in a real car, got lost along the way. Then came the anime plot twist. Someone on the team had an idea. What if we ditched realism and made something more arcade-style, more fun, alternate routes, secret ramps, and, I don't know, Beatles? Suddenly, the whole project shifted. The game that started out as Need for Speed 64 began to turn into something entirely new. Lighter, more chaotic, more kid-friendly. Something that made more sense for the console's audience and the cartridge's technical limitations. The name? Beetle Adventure Racing, released in 1999. A Nintendo 64 exclusive with quirky physics, tracks filled with dozens of hidden paths, a more colorful art style, and of course, only licensed Volkswagen New Beetle. From a serious racing game with supercars and police chases, it evolved into a wacky adventure starring cartoonish Beetle. The transformation of NFS 64 into Beetle Adventure Racing shows just how different the industry was back in the 90s. A game could completely change its identity mid-production if the devs realized the hardware couldn't handle it. And no one batted an eye. No outrage, no leaked trailers, no furious community. It was just, we changed everything, here's a game with beetles jumping over mountains, have fun. But looking back now, it's kind of sad, because Need for Speed 64 could have been the start of an entire generation of NFS games on Nintendo consoles. It could have introduced the brand to a new audience. It could have kicked off a line of Big N exclusives with their own unique identity. But no, it was shelved, reworked, and reborn as a game that many people don't even know had ties to Need for Speed. If you search for Need for Speed 64 today, all you'll find are some internal EA files, vague comments from former developers, and Beetle Adventure Racing. But the truth is, that game is the last remnant of what could have been a classic old-school NFS on the N64. And the most ironic part? Beetle Adventure Racing is good. Like, really good. A cult classic loved by those who lived through that era. It just never carried the Need for Speed name, even though deep down it was a lost child of the franchise. Now imagine this. You're in a high-speed chase doing 200 kilometers per hour down a city highway. A police SUV tries to ram you off the road, but you send it crashing into a fuel tanker. The camera slows down, shards fly through the air, the truck explodes, the screen shakes, and the word Takedown flashes in the corner. Sounds like Burnout 4, right? Well, it wasn't. It was Need for Speed. Takedown. This was the secret prototype Criterion was working on before they got pulled into the lukewarm world of Need for Speed Rival. A project that, had it made it off the drawing board, could have been the most insane and cathartic game in the franchise's history. For those who don't remember, Criterion was the studio behind Burnout 3, Burnout Revenge, and Paradise. Those games where wrecking other cars mattered more than actually driving well. After the massive success of Hot Pursuit 2010, EA gave Criterion more power within the NFS franchise, and that's where the experiment began. Even before most wanted 2012, Criterion was prototyping a new concept, a Need for Speed entirely focused on vehicular combat and arcade-style destruction, with pure Burnout DNA running through its veins. The pitch was simple and brilliant. The game wouldn't be about running from the cops. It would be about owning the streets, by force. You'd play as an elite street racer embedded in an international network of illegal racing, but instead of just competing, your job was to eliminate all rivals, literally. Missions like take down 5 cars before the tunnel, cause millions in damage on the highway, survive a convoy of armored SUVs for 3 minutes. The takedown system would be pulled straight from Burnout, but with a more realistic look, powered by a modern engine. Explosions, slow motion, debris flying, just like you remember from Revenge in Paradise, but now inside the Need for Speed universe. You weren't going to be the hero running from the cops. You were the unstoppable antagonist. The police would come at you with fury, and you'd destroy them, one by one. According to former Criterion staff, Takedown had a playable internal build, made using assets from Hot Pursuit and Burnout Paradise. The goal was to test the collision system and destruction physics. And the early feedback? This here is gold. The devs were excited. EA? Not so much. 2 major factors killed the project before it could take off. The transition to Ghost Game. Soon after, EA created a new studio called Ghost Game, now EA Gothenburg, tasked with unifying the vision for Need for Speed. Criterion was gutted, many devs were moved to Ghost, and the new directive was clear: focus on an open-world game with cinematic police chases. And the second factor? Fear of excess. EA was worried a game like Takedown would alienate the realism-loving crowd. We can't make a game where you get points for destroying cop cars like it's GTA with nitrous. They wanted something more serious, more ambitious. The result? Takedown was shelved, forever. Takedown could have been the perfect bridge between 2 of the most beloved racing franchises out there. The anarchic soul of Burnout, the branding and world of Need for Speed. It was the game that would have injected pure adrenaline into a franchise already starting to feel repetitive. And maybe, just maybe, we'd have a whole new subgenre on our hand, the cinematic destruction racer. But like every NFS that never saw the light of day, Takedown became just another dream, battered in a head-on crash with corporate reality. What if Tony Stark played Need for Speed? That was basically the vibe behind one of the most eccentric projects ever conceived by Criterion, Need for Speed Millionaire. And if you're thinking that name sounds like fan fiction, yeah, it kinda does, but it wasn't. It was real, extravagant, and of course, it got cancelled before you could even use your car as a jet ski. The game would have been about you, a bored billionaire who decides to use their ridiculous fortune to travel the world, compete in illegal street races, bet cars, crush rivals, and flaunt style and excess in every detail. The idea was to turn Need for Speed into a mix of Top Gear, James Bond, Fast and Furious, and lifestyles of the rich and famous, with a global map, missions spread across luxurious cities, exotic hypercars, planes, yachts, private jets, and even real estate to buy and customize. Yep, it was basically GTA for the automotive elite. You'd choose between several rich, eccentric characters, each with their own perks and disadvantages based on race type, available vehicles, or reputation. Kind of like picking a fighter in a fighting game, but with Bugattis. The concept involved a sort of world tour where you'd fly from city to city, like New York, Dubai, Paris, Tokyo, competing in ultra-exclusive street racing events. We're talking races in closed airports, police chases through the French Riviera, snowy mountain escapes in the Alps, and themed events on deserts and private islands. And of course, all of it in outrageously expensive cars that you could modify, paint in gold, give airplane sound systems, or whatever wild thing money could buy. And the rivals? Other billionaires. Arrogant, smug, full of lines like, "That's cute. I bought that Lambo for my dog last week." It was Need for Speed where the driver's personality was just as over the top as the exhaust. The studio behind it? Criterion Games, the same legends who gave us Burnout and took over NFS Hot Pursuit in 2010. They were brainstorming new directions before diving into what would eventually become Need for Speed rival. Millionaire was one of those experimental concepts. They kicked off with concept art, basic gameplay prototypes, and some UI mock-ups. EA even approved it for pre-production, and the team was excited about doing something fresh. A racing game with rich characters, a light narrative, and a satirical, over-the-top vibe. But then, EA changed direction. They decided the franchise needed a safer reboot, one focused on traditional gameplay. The open world of Rivals felt easier to sell. The eccentric billionaire idea? Shelved, cancelled within 6 months of development. The project later surfaced in portfolios of former Criterion devs, when a few pitch documents leaked online between 2015 and 2017. Just scraps. No gameplay footage ever leaked, no teaser, no real trace. But the name survived. Need for Speed Millionaire became one of those franchise myths, like a rich uncle who never shows up for Christmas, but everyone swears he's real. The most beloved game in the franchise was getting a direct sequel. If you grew up playing Need for Speed Most Wanted, then you've probably imagined this already. Racing through Rockport, the Blacklist, Razor, those insane police chases, the BMW M3 GTR, becoming the symbol of an entire generation. Now imagine all of that, cranked to the max. More story, more rivalries, more cities, and more danger. That was the plan. Most Wanted 2 was real. For a brief moment, it actually existed. The game was envisioned as a direct sequel to the 2005 classic. No reboot, no reimagining the concept. It was supposed to be Most Wanted 2 in every sense. Insider sources say the plan included a return to Rockport, now expanded with new connected areas, a brand new Blacklist with entirely new characters, while Razor operated in the shadows, a deeper reputation system where your actions shaped how the city treated you, and of course police that were more relentless than ever, adaptive AI, helicopters with non-lethal weapons, traps, barricades, and real-time manhunts. The tone was darker, grittier, more urban and dramatic, like Fast and Furious meets Heat and the Underground, 3 that never came. Development sketches began between 2009 and 2010, during a period when EA was testing new directions for the franchise, around the same time when Takedown and Millionaire were being born and buried. The problem? Too many hands on the wheel. EA had Criterion pushing for a return to pure arcade racing with Hot Pursuit, slightly mad studios experimenting with the realism of Shift, and internal teams debating the future of the Need for Speed brand. The idea of a direct sequel to Most Wanted was strong, but the fear of messing with the classic was even stronger. No one wanted to be the one to ruin one of the franchise's biggest successes, so in 2012, EA made a controversial call. They greenlit a new Most Wanted for Criterion, but not a sequel, a reboot. Most Wanted 2012 launched with an open world, a Burnout-style feel, and barely any connection to the original. Was it fun? Yes. As iconic as the 2005 version? Not even close. And to many fans, a letdown. The name Most Wanted 2 appeared in leaked EA documents, in ex-developers' portfolios, some still visible on LinkedIn between 2016 and 2019, and even in an alleged piece of concept art showing the BMW M3 with a darker paint job and the title Most Wanted Retribution. Nothing was ever officially confirmed, but the traces are there. And some say the concept of rivalry, escape, and cinematic storytelling in an urban environment was partially recycled in The Run and later in Payback. Need for Speed is a competitive MMO exclusive to Asia? Sounds weird? It was. But that was the bold concept behind Need for Speed Edge, a project by EA Korea in collaboration with Nexon, the powerhouse behind MMOs like MapleStory and Dungeon Fighter Online. The plan was to create a fully online, free-to-play Need for Speed game with RPG-style car progression, ranked PvP racing, aggressive microtransactions of course, and massive multiplayer with lobbies and tournaments. It was a Need for Speed made specifically for the Asian market, with the competitive mindset of an MMO and an aesthetic that felt like Underground meets League of Legends. So how did that go? Well, it launched in beta and died shortly after. Need for Speed Edge started development around 2014 as EA's attempt to expand the franchise's reach into Asian markets, particularly South Korea and China, 2 countries obsessed with online competitions and free-to-play MMOs. On paper, the concept had potential. Cars were unlocked through loot boxes, crafting, and progression systems. You had your own racer profile with levels, rankings, stats, and rep, and also tracks were inspired by classic NFS maps but reworked for multiplayer and live events. And of course, you could pay for advantages, exclusive skins, XP boosts, temporary upgrades, EA being EA. Visually, Edge looked decent. It ran on the Frostbite engine with lighter textures, optimized for lower-end PCs, which was essential for the target audience. The gameplay was a strange hybrid, not quite as arcade as Hot Pursuit, not as realistic as Shift. It sat somewhere in the middle with simplified physics to support online matches with 8 to 16 players. The game featured PvE events with bots, ranked PvP modes, clans, public lobbies, weekly leaderboards, daily challenges, seasonal events, all the typical MMO stuff, but with cars, neon lights, and infinite nitrous. Edge eventually launched, closed beta in 2015, and open beta in 2017, exclusively in Asian region, but the audience just didn't connect. Need for Speed fans wanted story-driven games. MMO fans wanted something deeper. Edge got stuck in the middle. Monetization was abusive. Pretty much everything was pay to win. Top-tier cars came in loot boxes with awful drop rates. Support was weak, updates were slow, bugs lingered, and matchmaking was a mess. The player base tanked. Less than 2 years after its open launch, the game was shut down in 2019, quietly, without any farewell or recognition. And just like that, the Need for Speed MMO was gone. Today, Edge is almost like a lost myth. Few videos exist, few creators ever covered it. EA never officially acknowledged the failure, but those who saw it, remember. And those who played it, probably gave up after their third useless loot box. It was EA and Nexon's attempt to turn Need for Speed into an online phenomenon like League or PUBG, but the car crashed before it even left the garage. The whole world is racing against you and you've only got a car and one reason to keep going. That was the vibe of The Run. A game that wasn't perfect, but bold and different. A Need for Speed with a story. And for the first time, it literally took you out of the car. The story behind The Run 2 starts right where the first one left off. And to understand why the sequel had so much potential, you need to remember what The Run was trying to do. In 2011, EA wanted to reinvent the franchise. They'd already tried realism with Shift. They'd brought back cop chases with Hot Pursuit. But they were missing something more dramatic, something with blockbuster flair. So they gave us The Run, featuring Jack Rourke, a protagonist in debt to the mob, racing from San Francisco to New York for a $25 million prize. It was basically Cannonball Run meets Mission Impossible, all riding on a turbocharged V8. The game had massive marketing, epic trailers, over-the-top action scenes with QTEs, avalanches in the Rockies, helicopters blowing up overpasses, rooftop police chases, and still, it flopped. Critically and commercially, it underperformed. But, and here's the thing, it sold just enough for a sequel to enter pre-production. After the first game launched, a small team at Black Box began working on early concepts for The Run 2. There's not much official material, but former devs have confirmed the project did exist, at least in early development stages. According to reports, the plan was to double down on what worked in the first game and fix what didn't. More freedom in route choices with branching paths and dynamic events, fewer forced QTEs, more hands-on interactive sequences, a new protagonist, or possibly Jack's return depending on the pitch. And this time, the race would start in New York and end in Mexico. Yes, The Run 2 was meant to be a kind of reversed sequel, crossing the US from east to south, featuring extreme weather, cartel territory, desert escapes, and border corruption. And unlike the first game, this sequel was pitched as darker, grittier, and more grounded. According to devs who worked on the concept phase, the checkpoint system with rival characters would return, but more organically, and cars would be more diverse with visual customization available from the beginning. Not long after The Run 2 entered conceptual development, EA made a big move. They shut down Black Box. Officially, it was a studio restructuring. In practice, it was the end of an era. Black Box was the heart behind some of NFS's most legendary titles: Underground, Most Wanted, Carbon, Pro Street, and The Run itself. And with its closure, any chance of The Run 2 died too. According to former staff, the pitch was shopped around to other EA studios like Criterion and Ghost Games. But EA's response was clear: we're not interested in linear narratives right now. We want more open experiences with a focus on multiplayer. In other words, no more action movie racing. Time to play it safe again. Why do so many fans still dream about The Run 2? Because The Run, for all its flaws, had soul. It was imperfect, but it was different. While most racing games play it safe, The Run took a risk, and The Run 2 promised to fix what went wrong, while doubling down on what made the original exciting. People still dream of that game, and let's be honest, a road trip full of explosions, corruption, and adrenaline, from Times Square to Ciudad Juarez, all backed by a V8 and Skrillex on the speakers, that would have been a chaotic masterpiece, but sadly, it never made it past the starting line. What if Need for Speed met Mr. Robot? No, this isn't a joke. It actually happened. Back in the heart of the PS3 and Xbox 360 era, the golden age of creative chaos in gaming, EA started playing with an idea that honestly sounds like it came from a Red Bull-fueled brainstorming session with zero oversight. What if we made a Need for Speed where the player goes up against hackers, is hunted by secret agencies, and has to escape terrorist attacks, all while driving at 200 kilometers per hour? This is one of the most obscure and insane prototypes ever whispered about inside EA. Almost no one knows about it, and even fewer believed it was real. But internal documents, leaked dev conversations, and fan-recovered portfolios confirm it. Terror 5 was real, at least on paper. The project's full name was Need for Speed. Terror 5. Yeah, Terror 5. It already sounds like a Jason Bourne spin-off with cars, but trust me, it gets way deeper and weirder. This game was born out of an identity crisis. The Need for Speed franchise was struggling to escape the long shadow of Underground and Most Wanted, two legendary titles. But EA had realized that just repeating the old formula wasn't going to cut it anymore. The audience wanted more. The market wanted narrative, cinematic action, something bold. So around 2008 to 2009, EA started experimenting with new directions. A creative reboot for the series, and three paths were born. Need for Speed Shift, with a technical, realistic sim racing style, Need for Speed Nitro, colorful and fast-paced arcade racing, and the strangest, boldest, most secretive of them all, Terror 5, the wildest concept EA ever greenlit. The core idea? Turn Need for Speed into a game about espionage and conspiracy, a world where illegal street racing collided with digital infiltration, criminal syndicates, cinematic escapes, coordinated explosions, all wrapped in a plot about hacking, mass surveillance, and urban terrorism. Sounds absurd? Oh, it gets better. The plan was to build a branching narrative system like Mass Effect, with choices that affected your route, reputation, and led to multiple endings. The protagonist, Jack, not the run version yet, was an ex-street racer caught in a web of cybercrime. And the car? It was more than transportation. It was your weapon, your home, your hideout, your escape tool, and your digital sabotage machine. In other words, it was Need for Speed, with one foot in Watch Dogs and the other in 24. Why was it canceled? Because no one at EA really knew what they were doing with it. Seriously, the developers got tangled up in the concept from the very first prototypes. The gameplay was all over the place. Sometimes it was arcade racing, sometimes stealth, sometimes sandbox-style exploration, all jumbled together. The team just couldn't find a fun core loop. And then came the worst enemy of any experimental project, executive doubt. The project was still in pre-production, with concept art, narrative pitches, and a few prototype systems. But it didn't get any further. EA looked at the creative chaos and said, "All right, this is getting too complicated. Pull it out of the oven before it explodes." And it did explode. The name Terror 5 appeared in leaked internal EA documents, some of which were referenced in developer forums and listed in archived project portfolios from former employees. The game's concept was even mentioned in now-deleted interviews with franchise producers during the transition between the Carbon, Pro Street, and the Run eras. Rumor has it that some of the cinematic chase ideas, helicopter set pieces, camera-rotating escape sequences, and explosive moments were later recycled into Need for Speed, The Run, and even Payback. Terror 5 itself? It died before it was born. Imagine the insanity of a Need for Speed game where you're in an illegal race through a futuristic city, and mid-race you have to hack a mobile server, dodge NSA drones, avoid a coordinated car bomb attack, and still win the race to keep your contact with the undercover agent. It would have been a mix of Need for Speed, Watch Dogs, James Bond, and Mirror's Edge. The kind of idea you don't see every day. Maybe that's why it got canceled. Or maybe it was canceled because it was too good to be true. Before Underground exploded, a project called Need for Speed Urban, or Redline depending on the source, was being secretly developed by EA Vancouver, and it was such a bold concept that it ended up being canceled, but also recycled. Yes, Urban was basically Underground Zero. The original vision, raw street culture. We're talking about 2002, maybe 2003. The Fast and the Furious craze was reaching its peak. EA knew it had to take the Need for Speed franchise in a new direction. That whole thing with exotic cars racing through Swiss trails wasn't cutting it anymore. The new wave was the street. And EA Vancouver started working on a grittier, more aggressive game concept, focused on illegal nighttime street racing in urban environments, heavy tuning with real aftermarket parts, characters from the underground scene, a story with rival street crews, aesthetic inspired by hip-hop, Japanese drift culture, and American warehouse races. All of that with an almost cinematic vibe, but with zero glamour, just engine, grease, and ego. But why has no one heard of it? Because EA never officially announced the project. Urban, or Redline, was one of those cases where the studio starts working on an internal concept, prototyping ideas, sketching out gameplay, but then EA's global creative leadership steps in and decides to shift direction. In the middle of that process, EA Black Box, another Canadian studio, took the lead on the franchise, and the idea behind Urban was absorbed and reshaped. As a result, Urban's essence was resurrected within Underground 1 and 2, which came shortly after. There are a few clues that Urban really existed. You won't find trailers or playable builds, but if you dig carefully through the franchise's backstory, there are traces. City concepts and art styles that closely resemble early development stages of Underground 2, a project codenamed Redline mentioned in internal EA documents, described as an urban culture experiment targeting 6th-gen consoles. A few former EA Vancouver employees have mentioned the game in unofficial interviews, saying the concept wasn't greenlit at the time, but ended up directly influencing what came later. And the abrupt shift from Need for Speed, Hot Pursuit 2 to Underground has never been fully explained. It was too radical a tone and style change in a single year. Coincidence? Even though it was cancelled, Urban left a legacy. The ideas of speaking characters, narrative cutscenes, and a reputation system, all of that was born there. And more. Some theories suggest that unused elements from Underground 2 reappeared years later in Need for Speed Carbon, especially the crew wars and the territory domination narrative structure. If true, Urban influenced 3 games without even officially existing. Urban could have been a turning point for the franchise even before Underground. It might have put EA 2 steps ahead of the competition, and more. It could have set the standard for urban racing games years before Juiced, Midnight Club, or even Tokyo Extreme Racer hit the mainstream. But maybe it came too early. In 2002, EA was still stuck in that European car mindset on Alpine tracks. A game where you mod a 2001 Civic and street race with neon under the hood sounded insane. Well, insane until Underground sold 15 million copies. You know when EA decides to do something different with a famous franchise? Sometimes it works, sometimes we get Need for Speed Nitro, and sometimes we almost get the most unexpected sequel in the franchise's history, Need for Speed Evolution, also known behind the scenes as Nitro 2. Yes, the Need for Speed that wanted to put the Wii and Nintendo DS at the front of the pack, with stylized graphics, an explosive soundtrack, and gameplay so arcade it made Hot Pursuit look like an FIA simulator. And for a brief moment, it was actually going to happen. Released in 2009, Need for Speed Nitro was EA's attempt to create a Nintendo-specific version of the franchise, at a time when the Wii and DS were dominating the market. Instead of realistic graphics, we got cartoon visuals, vibrant colors, exaggerated proportions, and a vibe more like Mario Kart than most wanted. It had visual customization, races in cities like Rio de Janeiro and Cairo, an upbeat soundtrack, and even a territory domination system where you painted the city in your crew's color by winning races. The game was fast, different, light, and actually fun. Not a blockbuster, but genuinely enjoyable. And then came the plan. Let's make a sequel. After Nitro's release, EA actually started working on a follow-up. The working title was Need for Speed Evolution. The idea was to keep the stylized look but push things further. Even more exotic cities, new power-up mechanics, like special abilities, blur style, even wilder customization, races with dynamic obstacles, improved local multiplayer with new party modes. Total madness. But the kind of madness that could have worked. So, what went wrong? Simple. Sales. Nitro didn't do terribly, but it underperformed by EA's expectations, especially considering the massive Wii install base at the time. On top of that, EA started recentering the franchise. The new direction was focused on more cinematic experiences and stylized realism. Side projects like Nitro lost their place in the roadmap. And with that, Evolution, or Nitro 2, was quietly canceled before it was ever officially revealed. Today, looking back, Nitro and its canceled sequel Evolution feel like an alternate timeline for the franchise, one where Need for Speed could have been as stylized as a 2012 Ubisoft game. Giant HUDs, cartoon effects, and cities that looked straight out of a Gorillaz music video. EA left that timeline behind, but some people still remember. And who knows, maybe one day we'll see a spiritual successor rise from that chaos, because the arcade racing scene is hungry for new ideas, and Evolution was exactly that. A wild, promising, original idea. And if you're also the type of person who collects Need for Speed dreams on your mind's hard drive, leave a like, comment on which of these canceled games you'd like to see released, and subscribe for more videos like this.